Good morning to you, and I'm glad that you joined us this morning. Here are the latest headlines from across the continent of Africa. We start with the papers from Kenya. The Star newspaper. Ruto, ICC threat forced Raila to call off demos. President refused to meet opposition leaders to discuss power sharing. That story is on page 6. Mukumu girls closed after suspected food poisoning. Deaths, that is all what we have on the front page there. Hospitals face 3 million Kenya shillings fine for prior admission fees in new bill. And positive update on patients whose foot reattachment in historic surgery 5 years. That story is on page 20. And how Ruto Raila deal will be realized. Hiring reforms overseen by ad hoc team. That story is on page 4 and 5 on the Star newspaper. The Standard newspaper. Hope after demo deal. After incessant pressure both locally and internationally, President William Ruto and Azimio leader Raila Odinga climbed down from their positions and agreed to dialogue, a move that has been received with jubilation across the country, with traders, church leaders and politicians hoping for long-lasting solutions. The story is on page 4 and 5. Trump gears up for tough court battle. That is on the international page. News on page 26. Kenyans reduce fuel power use after prices soared. You find that on page 4. And scramble for dominance in school games. And then Mukumu girls closed after two die of cholera. Very well. The Daily Nation. Search for Ruto Raila deal starts. President William Ruto on Sunday extended an olive branch to Azimio leader Raila Odinga, who called off the protest. And then still on the book, serialization, the day I almost sacked Oswago. You'll find that former IBC chairperson Isaac Hassan, his book is out, and since I think Sunday it's been serialized on the Daily Nation, so it's there. Kenya's debt up on weak shilling, and death of 2 students sparks fear over safety in schools, and then struggles of our pandemic babies. Very well. Let's see what else we have in the some countries across Africa. Namibia, food bank mess. Presidency washes hands of Nagob's baby. And the Sun also from Namibia. NBC drags biased media ombudsman to court. It's interesting. Media is just under attack all over the place. The Herald. This is from Zimbabwe. ZANU PF primaries, cheats drag lot disqualified. And top prosecutor jailed 12 years for releasing robbers. The Daily News from Zimbabwe as well. Government debars 13 farms over forex as prices keep surging. Zimbabwe dollar tumbles. This day from Nigeria, Yahaya army will contain all threats to nation's sovereignty, says operations against saboteurs raised oil production to 1.3 million barrels per day. And major shake-up as Navy redeploys senior officers. Okay. Sorry. Apologize for that. The Nation, as from Nigeria still. Governors elect at war over funds and projects. Ally takes on Tom in Benue. And then OT tackles Ikbeuza in Abia and Kano. It's Abia versus Ganduje. Okay, very well. APC organs should function, NWC members tell Adamu, and presidential poll credible. APC US witness Biden McCarthy. Okay. The Daily Trust from Nigeria still. Nigeria imports 300 billion naira palm oil in 6 years, gets supply from Malaysia, India, China, and Cameroon. And then Nigeria struggling to find buyers for crude. The Daily Monitor from Uganda. Missiles outbreak scares hits schools, and government releases 83 billion not Kenya shillings, but Ugandan shillings for schools renovation. Rainbow Nabukenya uses art to beat disability, and grandfather held for burying girl alive. Okay, now that's something there. The New Times from Rwanda. Women in informal sector request for tax exemption during maternity leave. And then farmers to get low interest loans in $3 million project. That is according to the Prime Minister Ngirenta. How many of you even knew Rwanda has a prime minister? Yes, we do have a prime minister in Rwanda. Fathers need longer paternity leave. Here's why. That story is on page 4, and this has been a raging debate across board. Yeah, I guess to bond with your kids at all. Well, The Guardian, we move over to the UK, revealed CBI in turmoil following new claims of sexual misconduct. And iNews, UK summer holidays hit by passport delays after new strikes. The Daily Telegraph, Nijo, Layson, Thatcher's tax slasher dies at 91. And the Daily Express from the UK as well, 42 years life for Olivia's life. And Metro, gutless, Olivia's murderer avoids facing her family as he gets 42 years. The Daily Mirror, Mom's bravery and the cowardice of a killer. 42 years for Olivia Gunman. On the Sun newspaper, Phil, I no longer have a brother. TV star breaks silence over teen sex abuse. Okay, a lot of those sounds like, tabloid and stuff, but the leading newspapers there from the UK this morning. So before I get us the weather, let's look at the sports news, see what we have and how the local newspapers here in Kenya has covered the sports items here. And on the Star newspaper, Bring It On, ambitious homeboys promise to fly Kenya's flag in Africa. Rivals Onjiko and Agorosari clash in Nyanza region opener. Those are for the secondary schools boys basket title defense that are ongoing. EPL managers in Whirlpool, says West Ham boss Moyes. That is on the international sports. Battle intensifies Chelsea versus Liverpool, the peak of vital midweek EPL games. And I think they do have the standings there for all the leading leagues, I think, across Europe. I see the English Premier League, I see the Spanish La Liga, a German Bundesliga, Italia Serie A or Serie A, how do you say it, and French League 1. We have it there. So Kiambu swimmers upbeat as Kampala Invitation Champions beckons. That is also there. And then do or die affair, or your rallies troops ahead of crucial Singapore Sevens. That is on the Kenyan Sevens. They shall be playing with Kenyan Sevens skipper Nelson Oyo has rallied his side ahead of pivotal Singapore Sevens this weekend. Shujaa were once again left red-faced after picking up a solitary point from the Hong Kong Sevens over the weekend. So I just hope that this time they do have enough sponsorship, because the last time our rugby team was playing, they had to literally fundraise from online because they were stranded or something like that. They did not have the funds. So I hope that the new officials at the Ministry of Sports are really taking care of our sportsmen and women. Okay, the Standard newspaper still, let's see how it has covered the sports this morning. Who will Chelsea turn to? Luis Enrique is thought to be interested by a move to the Premier League. Nigel's man, Pochettino, Zidane, who should replace a sacked Porter. As the season reaches its climax, there are several big names, title-winning managers on the market waiting for their next opportunity. And now two of the Premier League's big six are looking for a new boss after Chelsea sacked Graham Potter on Sunday. Okay, so that is there. And I think they've done an outline of all these possible replacements of this person. And they seem to be having very shiny CVs as far as their football career or soccer career, if you come from the UK, is concerned. If you come from US, I think US, they're the ones who say soccer, because for them football is a different game, the US football game. All right, battleground drone as Kayonzo and Kakamega scramble for dominance. Those are school games ongoing, and it's been an applying school games. This is quite interesting. Kenyan schools are really, they have a very interesting calendar and competitions and different games. It is time for amateurs to play in Tana Hill Shield. That also we have there. And Australian GP to investigate fan invasion. Australian Grand Prix organizers have promised to investigate after fans invaded the track before Sunday's race had officially finished. Footage showed a large group of the 131,000 strong crowd squeezing through barriers and climbing fences just meters from speeding cars. You would think that people who attend this things like this Grand Prix, this sports racing, sports like this, are people who by the time you can afford a ticket to go watch a Grand Prix, surely you have some money and maybe you have some class. Like, why are you climbing anything to invade it's not right. But I guess every sport has its own, I don't want to say hooligans, but such incidences are synonymous with football, are synonymous, that is where you find these things. I'm surprised that this large crowd in Australia invaded the track before even the race started. That was on Sunday, so they're investigating that to see why that even happened. I'm shocked because I see people attending this motor races. They are properly dressed and they seem quite premium in terms of all of that. But even with that, they can still invade a track. Well, okay. All right, so I guess we are now up to date with sports. Let me just give us a quick update on the weather this morning. In Johannesburg, it's going to be mostly sunny with highs of 24 degrees and lows of 10 degrees Celsius. And in Nairobi, we are going to experience scattered thunderstorms with highs of 25 degrees Celsius and lows of 17 degrees Celsius. And some rain is expected and some sunshine as well. In Accra, it's going to be partly cloudy with highs of 31 degrees Celsius and lows of 26 degrees Celsius. And in Dakar, it's going to be mostly cloudy with highs of 26 degrees Celsius and lows of 21 degrees Celsius. Abuja, highs of 37 degrees Celsius and lows of 24 degrees Celsius. And it's going to be mostly cloudy there in Abuja, Nigeria. And in Kinshasa, it's going to be partly cloudy with highs of 30 degrees Celsius and lows of 22 degrees Celsius. And then in Luanda, that is in Angola, highs of 30 degrees Celsius and lows of 25 degrees Celsius. And they will experience some thunderstorms there in Angola. And in Khartoum, highs of 39 degrees Celsius and lows of 23 degrees Celsius. And it's going to be partly cloudy there in Khartoum. And lastly, in Addis Ababa, the capital of African Union, is going to be partly cloudy today with highs of 21 degrees Celsius and lows of 12 degrees Celsius. So that is your weather update. Whatever your weather is, make sure you go out there and enjoy it. All right, you're now up to date. 14 minutes past 10 a.m. here in Nairobi, East African time. A very good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are tuned in and watching us from. Now let's get on with the news. And we start with Sudan, something that happened over the weekend, but I'd like for us to talk about today. And Sudan's military leaders and pro-democracy forces will delayed the signing of an agreement to usher in a civilian government. Both sides said in a joint statement issued early Saturday. The postponement of the signing, which had been scheduled for later Saturday, comes as key security reform negotiations between the Sudanese army and the country's powerful paramilitary rapid support forces appear to have reached a deadlock. Military generals met with pro-democracy leaders on Saturday, the capital Khartoum, and agreed to sign the deal April 6th. That is according to Khalid Omar, the spokesperson for the pro-democracy bloc, in a separate statement. The meeting was attended by representatives from the United Nations, the African Union, and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development in Eastern Africa, who have facilitated talks between the military and the pro-democracy group. Sudan has been marred in chaos after a military coup led by country's top General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan removed Western-backed power-sharing government in October 2021. Pending the country's short-lived transition to democracy, by last December, the military, the RSF, and numerous pro-democracy groups signed a preliminary deal vowing to restore the transition. In recent months, internationally brokered workshops in Khartoum have sought to find common ground over the country's thorniest political issues in the hope of signing a more inclusive final agreement. Chief among the discussions points have been security sector reform and the integration of the RSF into the military, the topic of last week's talks. But talks ended on Wednesday without any clear outcomes. Shihab Ibrahim, the spokesperson for one of the largest pro-democracy groups that signed December deal, said the army and the RSF have struggled to reach an agreement over the timeline of the integration. And I think when I was looking at this story yesterday, RSF wanted 10 years, the timeline for the integration, and the army wanted 3 years. I think this is very important. Let me see if I can get us the details, if at all I can get us the details here. But this is something that we have talked about, and if you watch us here, then you know this is something that has been on top our conversations as we have kept updating you with the happenings in Sudan since the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir and the military taking over, and how that has been working out. The initial agreed period for transition was 3 years, and the first agreement was done in August, just 4 months after the ousting. Omar al-Bashir was ousted in April 2019, and then in August they had this working agreement, the former transitional government, made up of 11 people, 5 from the military side, 6 from the civilian side, and then just they seem to have been working very well until the deadline was coming closer, and we saw how the military sort of took over and became very heavy-handed. And the civilian side was complaining of some intimidation, or there was not a good working relations between them. And so that led to the coup that removed the civilian Prime Minister Hamdok. Yes, Hamdok, I'm forgetting his first name. And I don't know what has become of him. I'm sure he's still in Sudan. And that started another rounds of protest and demonstrations, and Sudanese are really thirsty, if I can say that. You can see from these demonstrations that they have been holding. Remember, Omar al-Bashir, when he was in power, he led by the military. Sudan was a very militarized country. Matter of fact, the military ran key sectors in Sudan, even owns companies and stuff like that, especially those ones closely linked to the government. So Omar al-Bashir led Sudan for 30 years, and he led by the military. So the military is used to be part and parcel of the decision-making and everyday running of Sudan. And so when this transition happened, and the civilians seems to be having a bit more say in the happenings of their country, and I think they tested what democracy looks like. And in the age of social media, that has really added fuel, because they see how things are happening around the world. They see how democracy works. They see how human rights are being handled. They see what free speech looks like. They see how other countries are enjoying these freedoms. And so they are saying, that is what we want, and that is what I think will be best for Sudan. So one of the key things that happened after Omar al-Bashir was removed from power, they suspended the constitution, and they're to work on a new constitution, but problems even started at that time, because the military side wanted the constitution to be Sharia-based, but the civilians are like, we don't want that. We know we are a Muslim country, but still we want a more liberal constitution. So there is a stalemate in that. So I don't know what working constitution they have right now, but the constitution was suspended just after the removal of former President Omar al-Bashir. So there are a lot of things that needs to be happening in Sudan, but because of this stalemate, there seems to be no progress being made. And I've stated here before, and I will repeat it, the army is really not going to the barracks. The army is not interested in marching back to the barracks and leaving the affairs of the leadership of the country to civilians. And that is because, as I have explained earlier and before several times, they were part of the leadership of Sudan. So that is how they know, that is what they were used to. So just having somebody else come in that is not from the army and that is liberal and wants, a space where they can do things freely and certain freedoms to be enjoyed, that seems to be a problem for the army. And also we have to remember the murky issue of the ICC, that President Omar al-Bashir already has a warrant of arrest in it over the deaths that happened and the killings that happened in Darfur, that the army and the government is said to have committed during that time. And so that is also a problem, because the current leadership of the army officials in Sudan worked under Omar al-Bashir, and there's a high possibility that a few of them might be implicated should the ICC go ahead and start its investigations. Well, ICC went to Sudan and set up shop, was it last year or the other year? And I laughed at the idea, because I knew that was not going to be possible if Sudan continues to be how it is right now. You can't imagine that the military who are in charge right now, who can be implicated should ICC start off these investigations in Sudan, would just allow you to come in and set up shop, and they will cooperate and work together with you and allow you to have a successful working relation with the country. I didn't think so. So it didn't happen. So the last report that was presented to the United Nations Security Council by Karim Khan, the ICC chief prosecutor, he said there has been a lot of hurdles and there's no goodwill in regards to these investigations and what the ICC was meant to be doing in Sudan. That will continue like that. So they will not allow. And handing over Omar al-Bashir to the ICC, that will get them in trouble. So they will make sure Omar al-Bashir stays in Sudan. They have tried him through some other charges, I think corruption and others. He's serving jail term in Sudan. I really doubt if he's in jail, but that is just me thinking loud. But he is in jail. We saw him being brought to jail and being put in a cage and all that. It was not a very wonderful picture to see of a former president, but they can't hand him over. He is like the golden goose right now. If they hand over Omar al-Bashir to the ICC, that will get them into trouble, because Omar al-Bashir at this point in time, he has nothing to lose. If he finds, and I think he'll be much safer even at the ICC. So if he gets there, he'll start naming names, because at this point, he has taken one for the team, and everybody else who worked with him seems to have not have been held accountable. Only him is the one who's serving term, but everybody else who aided and abated and who benefited from everything else that he's being accused of, they're still walking scot-free, and a good number of them are still a part of the leadership of the army of Sudan. So you see how complicated that is. And so now there's a deal that was signed in December, and when that deal was signed, I think I came back here. I was on a break, so I came back in January and I said, oh well, I don't know how this is going to work. And they gave a timeline, and that was supposed to be on the 1st of April. Well, Fool's Day came and passed, and there was no deal that was signed. And so that is what we were talking about here. So on Saturday, that was supposed to be the day that this deal will be signed. And one of the key issues is on the rearrangement of security. Let me see if I can get the right term over this, because now I've told you about the ICC and why Omar al-Bashir has a warrant of arrest. And one of the key actors that also participated in the Darfur killings, we knew them as Janjaweed, but right now they have a new name and they're known as Rapid Support Force. But they are the Janjaweed, and the leader of the Janjaweed is the second in command of the Sudan military army and the Sudan side of the leadership. And seeing how things have been playing out, there seems to be a fallout between the leader of the military, Al-Burhan, and the second in command. And I think one of the key things that is at stalemate here is that the second in command, or I don't know how they arrived upon this agreement, that the Janjaweed, or let's just call them what they call them now, the RSF, the Rapid Support Force or something like that. So they are supposed to be integrated into army. And the last we were having this conversation, I probably underscored why this could be problematic. This is a militant group. This is a group with very specific assignments. This RSF is still being used in countries like Yemen. They are like mercenaries for hire. So how they operate and how they carry out their mandate is quite different from how your traditional army is. So insisting on integrating them into the army, I think this is something that is problematic because these are different actors with different ideologies. Unless these former Janjaweed are taken through a process where they get to be retrained and just for the military to be sure that they hold the same values and they think alike as far as how they look at security and things like that. And after that, now maybe they can be integrated. So they've not agreed upon the timeline. The RSF wants 10 years, the military wants 3 years. I think when I was reading this news yesterday in the afternoon, I didn't want to get so much into the details of it. Now you understand why it's such a long story. And so there has been a stalemate. But having them join the army, I don't know if it's a good idea. I don't know if it is for the betterment of Sudan, and how this was one of the things that they agreed upon. No wonder, even after the signing of this deal in December, Sudanese took to the streets because this deal has nothing to do with really some of the things that were talked about and agreed upon, and perhaps Sudanese who were fighting to remove Omar al-Bashir. These are not the kind of things they were agitating for. So I think they feel this deal is not working for them, and it does not have their interest at heart. So the army wants a 2-year, sorry, I'd said 3. The army wants a 2-year timeline for integration, while the RSF has called for a 10-year window. And a spokesperson for the Sudanese army and the RSF did not immediately comment. So this is a stalemate. I don't know if it's for the good of Sudan to integrate RSF, this former Janjaweed. Well, they've just changed their name, but the actions and what they do is just the same. All right, it's just the same. It's very much the same. Okay, so among other issues, I think the leader also has had a very cozy relationship with Russia. We've seen him visit Russia. We've seen him visit other countries that perhaps might not be sitting well with the head of the military, al-Burhan. So it is a sort of a split in the military in Sudan. And I think this will only add to the instability. And as long as the army keeps staying in power, they extended the transition period. It was supposed to have ended in 2022 last year. That was the initially agreed 3 years. But they added, in December, I think they added another 2 years. So up to next year, I guess, in December. Hopefully, God willing, if we get there. But even with that, I highly, highly doubt. I doubted if they will sign this deal, and I've been vindicated. And it's not even rocket science that I'm sitting here feeling like a prophet. I'm not. It's just that when you look at the factors and when you look at the past and the past behaviors and how they've responded and how they've acted in certain situations and how they've really been working to protect their own interest, then it's easy to tell if at all one of these things or some of these things they pretend to be doing, if they're doing them just to try to do a public relations exercise, because Sudan is hurting so much in terms of its finances and things like that and all this pressure. So it wants to get into the good books of the international society, international system, so that maybe they can get some loans, maybe they can look like they're doing some changes, but that keep backfiring because of the strategies and the things they use. And just a reminder, Sudan is not in the African Union. It was removed after the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir. And so these and other sanctions that have been put on them because of the military being in power, has really acted to add more pressure and to cause some problems for Sudan. So they have a lot in their plate, and I keep saying it will be easier for them to just go back to the barracks and protect the sovereignty of the country and the people in Sudan, and just let those people who are politicians, those people who are interested in these leadership positions, to just do their job. But them insisting on staying there, I think, poses another problem for Sudan, another security problem for Sudan, because as we see this disunity in the army, it creates another possibility for another counter coup, and the insistence of the second in command to have the RSF to be integrated in the army, that is also problematic. So when you have a problem compounded like this in the organs of a country's security, that is a time bomb, and any time from now, we don't know what to expect from Sudan. But I don't want to sound an alarm. When you're just thinking that progress is being made, then so many steps back is being taken. So that has been a quagmire and a stalemate that has continued in Sudan. So I was here to remind you that that peace deal that was supposed to be signed on Saturday did not happen. So they've given a new date, and that is the 6th. Oh, hold on. Today is Tuesday, the 4th. So that is supposed to be on Thursday, so I'll be here bright and early, and I'll let you know if at all they would have agreed in some of these articles in this agreement, and see if at all they will sign. But we might find another problem, or maybe if they rectify parts of that agreement, so maybe they'll be able to sign. But still, I have my doubts. Even the people in Sudan, I had their doubts, and even with as the 1st of April approached, there are others who kept holding protests in Khartoum and other places in Sudan, because they are saying they've lost trust. They don't trust the military right now. They don't trust the leadership of the military. So anything they say, until it's really done, they really can't trust. Their words do not match their actions, so they've lost the trust and the confidence that the people had in them after they ousted Omar al-Bashir. So okay, so that is what is happening there. So you know what, I'll keep you up to date with this story, and if at all there will be any new developments. Now we have to move on to another story that I want us to talk about as well. The US is trying to wreck Russia's planned summit with African countries as part of efforts to isolate Moscow, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed in an interview published on Tuesday. Lavrov told the news site Argumenti that Moscow is different from Western countries in its relations with Africa. In what we never tell, I'll quote him, in what we never tell our foreign partners how they are supposed to live, we have no secret agenda. Okay. Now, Moscow is preparing for its second summit with African countries scheduled for the end of July in St. Petersburg, including work on infrastructure, technology, and energy projects. In any case, Lavrov said the chances of damaging the conference were diminishing as fewer and fewer people are now willing to pull out all the stops for former colonial powers. The U.S. State Department did not immediately respond to a request for comment by the media who were questioning who wanted a response to what Lavrov was saying, that the U.S. is really committed in causing havoc and disrupting this planned summit that Russia has planned with African countries. And I want to sit here and go over and over and over all these countries and all these maneuvers they're making and all these summits. Yesterday we were talking about that summit that China had on democracy, and I think they were just interrogating, that happened last week, interrogating the prospects and possibilities of different democracies and how they fit within the context of different countries and the needs that different democracies could serve. And I think out of that meeting, what we were talking about yesterday is that there's no one yardstick when it comes to application of democracy, or how democracy is a practice depending on whatever jurisdiction. Okay, so but that is not the conversation we're having this morning. It is the increased summits, the increased meetings that these specific Western powers are having with Africa. You know, the U.S. just had in December, the Africa Leaders U.S. Summit that happened in December, between December the 13th and the 15th. And the U.S. invited everybody from the continent, apart from, I think, 5 countries. Eritrea, which the U.S. has always insisted is a pariah state. And then Sudan did not go, Mali, Burkina Faso, and which other country? It is Mali, Burkina, and Guinea. Okay, because these 4 countries have gone through a military coup and they have been suspended from the African Union because of the military coup. So they did not go, and of course Eritrea, for that reason that I have explained. And our leaders were just happy to show up to this summit. At this point, I'll stop blaming Russia. At this point, I'll stop blaming the US. At this point, I'll stop blaming the EU. I'll stop blaming China. I think we have to stop blaming these external powers and the influence and how they're running their interest and they're running their game in this continent. And this summit that is being organized, our leaders would gladly pack their whatever and go to St. Petersburg and attend. There's nothing wrong with that. They attended that one in Washington. They've attended one in China, Beijing, a few days ago. They will attend another one if Japan decides to host one. They'll also pack their bags and attend another one if EU decides they want to have one. And I think EU is preparing to have another conference with the African leaders, or a conference on Africa soon. I don't know the exact date, but I think it should be happening in the next few weeks. Okay? So this obsession by Western powers on Africa and their interest on Africa is what baffles me, but that's not the part that baffles me. It is the part that our leaders, knowing very well, I want to believe our leaders are not that naive, that they will allow themselves to be part of these proxy wars. They will allow themselves to be played as pawns in these games on an international system. They will willingly give themselves up to be part of this chess game that at the end of the day we don't get to benefit from. Well, now they want to flex their muscles and they want to prove how influential they are. They bring that nonsense here in the continent because they know our leaders will gladly cooperate with this nonsense. This has to stop. Why all these summits? Why do we have all these summits? Why can't we have Europe having summit with Asia? Why can't we have Europe having summit with other countries? Why is it that it is our leaders here that has to be, every now and then are being called to these summits so that they can be influenced, so that they can take certain positions, so that they can run certain interests? At the end of the day, the US, as I have said here repeatedly, or Russia, or China, or Japan, or whichever other country, they are working to meet the goals of their foreign policy. And Africa, my motherland, Africa, you have become the new playing field for these international actors and for these jostling of powers. Because what is happening now is called, it's just a power struggle. Okay, it's just a power struggle, and that is what we are seeing, and that is just all what the international politics is about, power struggles. And the more powerful you look, you seem to look in the world, perhaps the more respected or the more influential. If you can accumulate power, and if you at least can be seen to have that power, then you sort of have a say. And people like China and Russia are really committed to disrupting this unipolar thing that the U.S. Has been, dominating the world as a superpower. Remember, after the World War II ended, the U.S. did not participate. All the countries' resources were depleted. The U.S. came in last. Remember the bomb that hit Hiroshima? That marked the end of the World War II. And then the U.S. came out much stronger. Its economy was not affected compared to other nations. And somehow it was able to stand tall. And that's how the U.S. found itself as a superpower. And then That was after that we saw the long Cold War that went on for 40 years, that ended by the ending of the USSR, which also the West worked so hard to dismember. So now these are world politics that is being played. This visits, this interest is just an extension of all that. And now Africa is the new playing field. And the fact that our leaders cannot see this, the fact that the leadership in this continent just give themselves up to be played as a fiddle, that is just disappointing. You were busy building economies. What time do you have attending all these summits all the time? You're just packing bags, wasting your national resources. Attending summits that at the end of it all really is not going to, it's not bringing any much to your countries, but you're happy to do it. Russia calls, you're happy to go. The US calls, you're happy to go. Which other country? China calls, you're happy to just pack your bags and go. Why can't they come here? Why are you always the one packing your bags and going, as if you have nothing to do? We have dilapidated economies. We have problematic health systems that was really exposed by COVID-19. We knew it was bad, but we didn't know it was that bad. We have things that we're supposed to be looking at, but we are busy traversing the world, wasting resources, and for what? Surely, nowadays, with even technology, you could have these summits on Zoom. But because these things are meant to make certain statements, and that's why Russia must have you now go all the way to St. Petersburg, and you will be happy to go and attend this summit. That's why China would want you to go to Beijing, and you'll pack your bags and you'll be happy to go. And that's why US would want you to go to Washington and hold this state dinner for all of you. And so you will be happy to pack your bags to go. But these are things they make. This is how they're making statements. This is part of their proxy wars. This is part of the jostling for powers. This is part of the power struggles. Have you not understood how the international system works? Do we have really that naive leaders in this continent that really don't understand the international politics? And you're used, and you've given yourselves to be used. It's embarrassing. This has to stop. And now they're fighting over. Now Russia is saying, the US is trying to disrupt our meeting with Africa and the summit that is being planned. And they're trying to isolate Moscow. We don't want to be caught up in that conflict. We don't want to take position. We don't want to be parts of any of that. So we are dragged into it, and then we are happy to be dragged along, and then we just arrive there, and now what? This is ridiculous. This has to stop. So anyway, yesterday we were talking of almost the same matter, and I was explaining the proclivity of Africa and its people towards maybe Russia, even for those who don't agree with Russia and its ideology. But you'll find that we, in the continent, we really can't take those hard stands against Russia because Russia never colonized us. So, the Western world, as much as they are baffled that Africa has refused to condemn, Russia with one voice. And that is because Russia was one of the key Western powers that was really helpful to Africa during decolonization period. Remember, Russia never colonized anybody in this continent. So its relationship with Africa really, in the yesteryears, is not as tainted. It is just the current maneuvers it is making, and maybe the ideology and other things that it is doing that might not sit well with some of the African countries and what they believe in. And we even have values or some systems that we really believe that we base our decisions upon. But I guess for some of us we do. For some countries, I think they do. And so, but there's no that link to a dark past between Russia and Africa. And so I think Russia is taking advantage of this. And just to quote what Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, was saying during this interview on what he says the U.S. planning to wreak havoc in the summit that it is planning with African leaders. He said, it is true that the United States and its vassals are doing everything possible to achieve Russia's international isolation. In particularly, they are trying to torpedo the planned second Russia-Africa summit to persuade our African friends not to take part. Attempts to interfere in our cooperation with countries for the global south and east will therefore continue for success, but success is far from guaranteed. And in any case, Lavrov said, the chances of damaging the conference were diminishing. As fewer and fewer people are now willing to pull out all the stops for former colonial powers. You see, that's it. Now that is the part that now they're using. They're saying you can't insist that you mean well for Africa, and yet you are the former oppressors. So I think they're using that to their advantage now. And I think that is what has turned the Western powers, and their not understanding their confusion on why Africa is reluctant to totally agree with maybe some of these sanctions, or you've seen the voting at the United Nations General Assembly against Russia, some of these votings, and you'll find that some African countries just decide to abscond the vote, and a few have voted against Russia, and others have voted in support of Russia, but majority would rather just not participate and abscond from voting, and that has baffled the Western powers. But I think much of it has to do with the colonial past, and they consider Russia to never have participated. In fact, it aided and supporting and hosting some of our exiled leaders from this continent. So, but it is the ideological differences that perhaps brings us a problem between some African countries and Russia. Okay, so whatever Russian prime minister is saying, not prime minister but foreign affairs minister, might not be far-fetched. Might not be far-fetched, because every power is now jostling to posture itself and to have influence over the continent. So anybody who seems to be having a leverage in that regard, and Russia, we've seen Russia making some progress in this. So the US is not very happy about it, and that's why the summit that it had in December. And it's hosted even the worst of the leaders in this continent, something that the US perhaps might not have done in the previous years, but it realized these conditions and these conditionalities is what perhaps is pushing the Africa leaders to the east and now to Russia, and this is working against them. So, and now Russia is just using this against them. They're saying, our African partners, when they come, I'll quote him, we never tell our foreign partners that put that Africa how they are supposed to live. We have no secret agenda. In other words, when you're giving them these monies, they're not talking to them about human rights abuses. So show us your human rights records. So before we give you this money, could you remove this political prisoner? Could you reform your electoral process? Could you do this and that? Okay. Before we give you money, could you work on your democracy? Make sure you have a term limit, and make sure you have this kind of democracy, and make sure this is the process that you follow. Before we give you money, we want to see your corruption index, and where are you falling in the transparency corruption index, and how are you working to fight corruption and things like that. Moscow doesn't care, and China doesn't really care, and that's why we, a lot of our African leaders who really, them and accountability, they're just averse. They look at China, and because China does not care. You and your corrupt self, you and your bad human rights, you and your poor governance, you and your lack of democratic practices, it's fine. We'll just give you the money. How much do you want? What road do you want for us to build for you? Or do you want us to give you a parliament? Oh, ECOWAS. Would you like for us to build for you a headquarter? African Union. I see you don't have one good space that you need to sit on. We'll take over that and we'll build you your headquarters. What a shame. In Addis Ababa, but China built that for us. Okay? So it does not care. It does not care what you're doing because China is really focused. China is really focused on its ambitions, on its interest. So however it's going to achieve that, it will achieve that. All other issues, those ones you can deal with. But it has been very strategic, it has been very pragmatic, and before the US realized China had made so much progress in this continent. And now the US and other Western powers are now trying to relax on these preconditions they normally put forth that really has worked against them as African leaders who really don't care for accountability decide to work with people who also don't care about the same. So, and that's what, this Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is reiterating. He says, we never tell our foreign partners how they're supposed to live. We have no secret agenda. That part I doubt. The second part, the first part is true. You never tell them how to live. But you tried telling us how to live the other day. What do you mean, Lavrov? Because, Lavrov, you said that you have enough food that you can give to these dying Africans, but freely, you won't even sell it to us, but on a condition that we sever some of the agreements, we don't renew some of the agreements that we've had in the different African countries with Ukraine. Is that not a condition? Is that not a condition? That is the same condition you're trying to put for us. Of course, it does not come in form of human rights and these other things that the US and the Western powers normally push down our throats, and sometimes for good reasons, but other times they don't even practice these things themselves. They support regimes around the world who are in violation of these things that they say that they stand for and they support. But you also try to do the same. So let's have one standard rule for everybody. But on this one, the foreign minister for Russia, I think, it's quite on it. But on the second part of saying that Russia has no agenda, of course Russia has a secret agenda. Of course it does. It can't be sending mercenaries in these countries to help with the government, and the next thing you hear, they're the ones who are coordinating these mines in Central African Republic, in Burkina Faso, in other areas, and then you want to tell us you don't have a secret agenda. Of course you do have a secret agenda. The US has a secret agenda. But theirs is not too secret. You can tell what exactly they want. The UK and these other countries. So every country, and that is the nature of international relations or diplomacy. That is the nature of diplomacy. Okay? We don't have relations for nothing. We don't have a relationship without an agenda. Countries don't relate like that. And that's why you'll find there are countries whose embassies, say in specific countries, are more bigger, with a bigger staff and a bigger manpower because of the interest they have in that country. Okay? The US has such a huge embassy here in Kenya, because of the interest it has here and what Kenya means to this region, and that's why it has invested. I'm sure that is not, when you go in other parts of Africa, that is not what you will find. But here, because it has so much interest, and every now and then it interferes in our elections, in our staff, that is because Kenya is a very strategic partner to the US, and Kenya is very important as far as the US foreign policy is concerned. So there's no country that relates with another country with no agenda. There's always an agenda. There's always an agenda as to why we choose to relate diplomatically with the country that we choose to relate to. So there is an agenda, Foreign Minister. There is an agenda. Moscow has an agenda. And it's not secret now. And the agenda for Moscow is to destabilize these other Western countries and their influence in Africa. And we see how it has been making progress in that area. So that is the agenda. And then on top of that, when you look at the countries that Russia is finding a footing, look at the mineral resources in these countries. And these are the countries also that France and other countries are also fighting to have influence over, and China. So those are the agendas. And I think they're quite out there. So for you saying Russia has no agenda, I think that is not true. Russia has an agenda, so is everybody else. So is Kenya, so is Uganda, so is everybody else. Okay? We all have agendas. We just don't make decisions based off of goodwill and based out of, we just feel like we have enough soldiers. So let's just take some to another country, or let's just engage in this way. Nothing happens like that. nothing happens. There's always a strategy. There's always something that is being pushed. There's always a goal that countries are trying to meet in relations to their foreign policy, and so every move is strategic. Everything that is being said has to align. So there's always an agenda, and in the international system, the state will always look for its own interest. That is how that is, and so whichever way you choose to do it and achieve that, they do it. Others will use force, coercion and things like that. Others will use the soft diplomacy. They will bring aid. They will do the dollar diplomacy. They will support education. They will support your health systems. They will support that and endear themselves, especially to the people. It's also called citizen diplomacy. Endear, look for programs that go. Look at United States and its agencies, like USAID. USAID is part of the United Nations government, and there is direct help that is given, say, to Kenya, because it has a footing across many countries across the world, but where the US has its interest. So there are things that they don't trust the Kenyan government that will handle properly. So they will give that aid through USAID, and USAID will fund projects that has to do with maybe teenage pregnancies and getting these teenage mothers back to school, maybe just things that directly, education and things like that directly affect the people. Okay, so if a country is not very careful, such institutions also, of course, they use as a part of their monitoring and the evaluation and how they set their agendas. These institutions help them in return. So they give the report back to the US government. And then when the US government is crafting its foreign policy on Africa, it is based off of reports it receives from such institutions and others, that give them the intelligence and the information. So when they're crafting in how to achieve their ultimate goal, they know how to go about it based off the information that they have received. So that is how that works. That is how diplomacy works. It's very tricky, and it's very corny, and it's very, very tricky. So if you have people who are naive, like we have here, our heads of states in this continent, all of them, because all of them carry bags and go to these meetings. And I think there's one of them who makes noise about it, President Paul Kagame. He's never interested in these summits, and for good reasons, and I support him on that. For the rest, they're just happy to go take buses and do all these things and attend these useless summits that at the end of the day are not really helping us in this continent. So we need to really prioritize our things here. We need to have priorities in the different African countries and see these summits, these proxy wars. Do we really need to get ourselves into? Must we really be we are being used in this, and we're just puppets, and the master puppeteers are just pulling the strings, and we're just happy to be dancing there and to be used. I think we should remove ourselves from some of these things that are really not necessary for us to be involved. Okay. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. I'll be back here at 3 p.m. with more news from across the continent of Africa. A couple of things I wanted to talk about, but I won't because of time. But I will talk to us about later on. Enjoy the rest of your day. My name is Miriam Ogoto. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.